Okay, so let's go over question 690, employee importance. It's a medium question, and let's start reading over it. So you have a data structure of employee information, including the employee's unique ID, the importance value, and direct subordinates IDs. You're given an array of employees, where employees at i.id is the ID of the ith employee. Employees at i.importance is the importance value of the ith employee. Employees at i.subordinates is a list of the IDs of the direct subordinates of the ith employee. Given an integer ID that represents an employee's ID, return the total importance value of that employee and all their direct and indirect subordinates. Okay, so here we're given an example of employees list and different values. So this relates to the first employee, this relates to the second employee, and this relates to the third employee. We're given an ID of 1, so we will be finding all the the total importance of all of the employee and all the direct and indirect subordinates. In this case, employee ID 1 has value 5 and subordinates are 2 and 3. So you look at the importance of 2, which is 3, and there are no subordinates for that, so it would just be 3 added onto 5, and then that's 8. And then we also look at the importance of 3, which is also 3, so, and there are no subordinates for that, so we just add it to 8, and that's 11. So just going over the explanation, employee 1 has an importance value of 5 and has two direct subordinates, employee 2 and employee 3. They both have an importance value of 3, thus the total importance value of employee 1 is 5 plus 3 plus 3. Okay. Now employee, for the second example, employees is equal to this list right here with two different employees, employee ID 1 and employee ID 5. Employee ID 1 has value 2, importance value 2, and then a subordinate of 5. Employee 5 has value of -3 and subordinates are none. And we're given as ID 5. So we look at ID 5 and then we look at the value for that specific ID, which is -3. And we're looking at all the direct subordinates. In this case, there are none, so we would just have -3. Okay, so let's go into the explanation on how to solve this question and then go into the coding implementation. Okay, so let's go into the explanation of question 690, employee importance. We're given the list, employees with 3 different IDs in this case. We're also given an ID value which is equal to 1 that we will be finding the importance values for. So just to make it easier to see, employee ID 1 has employee importance of 5 and the subordinates are 2 and 3. Employee ID at 2, importance is 3 and subordinates are none. And the employee ID at 3 is employee importance of 3 and subordinates are none. So we will be looking at employee ID 1 because that's the ID that we are told to find the importance values for. And we can start this by first creating 2 different dictionaries. We have the first dictionary, employee importance, which takes in a key as the employee ID and the value being the importance for that specific employee. So for the case of employee ID, which is equal to 1, the key would be 1 and the importance would be 5. Or the value would be 5 for that specific employee. It would also have employee 2 and 3, where these are the keys and the values are the 3s because that's the importance for that specific employee. For the subordinates employee importance, we have the key being the same as before, which is the ID of the employee itself, so 1, 2, and 3, but the value is going to be list of the subordinates, the IDs of the subordinates. So in this case, for ID 1 or a key 1, the value is going to be 2, 3. For key 2 is going to be an empty list, and key 3 is going to be an empty list. So we can populate this at the start of the program, and here's what it looks like after it's been populated. Next, we will be doing DFS here. DFS is because we know that if we look at employee ID 1, we just have to go deeper into employee 1 and find all the subordinates for that specific employee. Then when we find the subordinates for that specific employee, we have to go dig deeper into each specific subordinate. So for instance, employee 1, we would look at the subordinates of 2 and 3, but we would look at 2 first and dig deeper into what the subordinates for 2 are. In this case, there are none, but if there was maybe 4 or 5, we would dig deeper into 4 and 5, and then dig deeper into 4 first. If 4 didn't have any subordinates, then we would just go into 5. In this case, 2 doesn't have any subordinates, so we get the value for 2 and we return it, and we also get the value for 3 and return it, and then pass it into the importance value that 1 has. Now, here we are going to start off with DFS of ID 1, and we will first add the importance value of that specific employee. In this case, we know that the employee importance of ID 1 is 5, so we will just add 5 into the result. Next, we will do the DFS of the subordinates, in this case 2 and 3. So we have two different values here, DFS of ID 2 and DFS of ID 3. We'll first go into 2 because that's going to be the first value being that we will be doing DFS on. And when we do DFS on that, again, we were going to go into employee importance and get the value for that. So in this case, it's 3. So we add 3 into our result for DFS of ID 2. And then we see that there are no subordinates for that, so you don't need to really do any more DFS into that specific ID. So we can just return the value 3, and it gets passed into ID 1. So result at ID 1 is going to go up to 8. Right? We add the 3 into the 5. Next, we will be doing the DFS of ID 3, and somewhat similar to the previous one where we have the employee importance of 3, so we add 3 into our result. And right after this, we check if there are any subordinates for the ID 3 in the subordinates importance dictionary, and we notice there's nothing in there. So we return the value that we just have, the result, and that result gets added into the DFS of ID 1. So DFS of ID 1 goes up to 11, and that's it. That's the answer that we need to return, and so we will return the value from DFS of ID 1 in this case. Okay, so let's go into the coding implementation of this problem. I did mention that we will have two different dictionaries we initialize, employee importance and the subordinate importance. Now, in order to populate those values in there, we will have to loop through the employee list that we were given. So we'll loop through it and grab the values from it. So employee importance at employee ID, because that's going to be our key, we will be passing in the employee importance into it. And we'll also be populating the subordinate importance dictionary with the employee ID being the key again, but in this case it would be the employee dot subordinates as the value for it. Now we do have to do DFS after this point, so I'm just going to make a helper function up here, call it DFS, and it will take an ID. Now I also said that we need a result here. Result is going to hold the result for that ID and then pass it on to any other DFS that was being called previously. So we have a result, which is going to be the employee importance at the specific ID we're passing in. Then once we're done with that, we also have to loop through all the different subordinates for that specific ID and then do a DFS on them. So we can do a subordinate, a DFS on the subordinate importance dictionary at the specific ID, and then result just adds the DFS of that specific ID onto it. So what happens here is result is going to become the employee importance for that specific ID. So in this case, ID 1 is going to have importance of 5, and then we will loop through every value inside of subordinate importance for a specific ID. For the ID of 1, we will loop through 2 and 3, and so 2 gets passed into sub, and we do a DFS on sub. Once we return a value for that, 3 gets passed in, and we do a DFS on 3. And once we get all the values for that, we return it here, and it adds it into result, and then we just return result. And that's it. All we have to do down here is return a DFS of the ID that we are starting off with, and that's it. And when we run this code, let's see. Oh, so we need employees because that's the name here. Yeah, so this is it. I'll submit the problem as well. But yeah, there we go.